Kagan, I know one thing. You and I are going to have to step up our energy level after talking to Michael. I don't know how he does it.
I'm ramping it up right now.
Well, one thing is for sure. If Loveworks would have been around when we were kids, I would have literally been running out of the schoolhouse. I wouldn't even want to go home. I'd just go straight to Loveworks.
Schoolhouse? How old are you? Who uses schoolhouse anymore?
I do. I'm an old soul.
Well, I know that I would have started another 5 businesses if I would have had the energy that Michael has.
Well, good thing it wasn't around when we were kids.
That's probably true. When the going gets rough, you know how the saying goes. Sometimes things happen. Life happens, and it's not always our fault. In this podcast, we'll feature real-life testimonials from people like you, from good times to bad, funny memories and hard lessons learned. Everyone has a story, and everyone has been there. From business owners to parents to young adults, the Hive 5 aims to tell stories of overcoming the struggles of adulting while celebrating the little victories of life. In each podcast, our guests will give insight to 5 key takeaways from someone who's been there and done that, leaving you better than when you started. Hey guys, thank you so much for listening today. My name is Kagan with BriteBee.
And this is Catherine with BriteBee. Thanks for joining us again on the High Five Podcast.
Hey guys, we are so excited to have Michael Hirsch today, and he is with Loveworks. He is the executive director of a nonprofit in Norman, Oklahoma. And I'm not even going to say anymore because he needs to tell us more about what Loveworks is and also who he is. Michael, welcome.
Well, thank you guys. It is just an honor to be on this episode with you guys, and really excited to be able to share just about our organization, Loveworks Leadership. And it's an organization that we started a little over 7 years ago. And it began here in Norman, Oklahoma, when we saw a huge need, not only just in our community, but in surrounding cities across Oklahoma and even across our nation. And it happened to be along the lines of a lack of opportunity for junior high students. So to give our listeners context, we're talking about ages 11, 12, 13, and 14 that have the fewest amount of after-school opportunities available to them. And so we really stepped in a little over 7 years ago, and we created an organization to meet that need and really to be able to help junior high students begin to take steps towards discovering their purpose, their passion, and living into their dreams.
How did you guys discover the need?
Yeah, so we created an outreach, a once-a-month outreach in our community that was called, at that time, Loveworks Outreach. And it was really unique, where we would identify different philanthropic efforts in our communities, ranging from food banks to homeless shelters. And we would team up volunteers, college students, young professionals, older professionals, that would go out into the community. And it was just all about just being consistent in the lives of those that we would reach and that we would touch. And someone just kind of mentioned just the name, like, hey, love, just something that just like always works, it never fails. And so when I heard that name, it always like stuck in the back of my mind that one day that we would do something and we create something using that word. And little did I know that it would be the word that we would use to really, I think, best describe our work that we're doing here in Norman now.
That's awesome. Michael, tell us a little bit about you and what Loveworks does. I mean, we've been to Loveworks, and I want to paint that picture for everybody else who's listening, because guys, you walk in, the very first thing they have is a ball pit. It's like McDonald's as a child.
But a lot cleaner.
Yes, way cleaner than McDonald's, no offense. But it's so cool in Loveworks, and you walk in and you're like, man, I want to be a kid again, because this place is awesome.
Absolutely. We wanted to thank you for saying that. We wanted to create a place that students would love to spend time after school. And I think it's just appropriate to mention this just about how we start off. A junior high student starts off their day at Loveworks, because I'm on the High Five podcast. And that's how our students enter in our campus every single day. And so imagine a group of students getting off a big school bus, and our staff and our army of volunteer leaders are outside with big smiles, and we're cheering and we're high-fiving every student that walks into their campus. That really just sets the energy, and just an opportunity for us to be able to look each student in the eye and just let them know that, hey, somebody is thinking about them, in this moment, and that we care about them. And that really kind of sets the tone for what we create at Loveworks. And so students have the opportunity to participate in our program 2 days a week. And on that first day that they're at Loveworks, we really focus on the leadership and character development side of things. And then the second day is when we're focusing on building competence. And then we're really focusing on the experiential learning component. We have an over 12,000 square foot campus here and 13 different studios that we have younger, we have older professionals and retirees that volunteer their time, and they share their passion with our students every day.
What does the change look like? I mean, is there a change in the kids from when they start to when they finish? I mean, do you see a life change in them?
Oh, we definitely do, and it happens a lot sooner than you would think. In fact, it's quite interesting to note that students that first start participating in Loveworks will pull one of our staff aside, and it's interesting that some of the first things that they'll ask us questions about is, so this is like, imagine a sixth grade student is beginning to ask a question. Well, what will happen, after I'm promoted from middle school into high school, where there'll still be an opportunity for me that Loveworks would provide. And so you see just right away, that they've been captured just by the environment, that our amazing staff and leaders create here. But then, it's Loveworks. We believe that, a person is never too young to be a leader. And it's so exciting to watch the countenances in the faces of our students change over time when they begin to realize that they have a purpose, that there's a plan for their life. And we provide opportunities here, at Loveworks in a safe environment for them to be able to do that and to be able to experience that. And the change that we've seen is carried over into students' academic performance in school. We hear from parents that are pulling us aside, and they're talking about now how they just noticed that their son or their daughter's level of, just respect or the way that they're treating their siblings has changed. And I mean, we believe that's a game changer. If we're noticing a change in home and in school, that really is encouraging to us, about the work that's taking place.
Michael, I'm going to compliment you for just a moment and tell everybody a little bit about you as a person. If y'all haven't caught on yet, we'll have to share a picture in our show notes. But Michael is the most enthusiastic, smiley, happy, outgoing, going to give you a hug the moment he sees you kind of person. Every time we hear you or talk to you or see you, we just are so filled with joy. And so it must take a really special person like you to do that with these kids every day, and for them to trust you and confide in you and look forward to seeing you. And I just think that that's awesome. And also your crazy, awesome hair, I know must be a big hit with the kids at Loveworks.
It is. And thank you so much for saying that. I've mentioned our team just a few times, and we just have an amazing staff here that I really believe that we bring out the best in each other. So thanks for saying that. About my hair, listeners, I'm glad you mentioned that they will be able to later see a picture of me out in public. I'm known as three names that I typically hear. I'm either the Loveworks guy, I'm the salsa guy, and I think we're going to talk about that a little bit later. But the majority of people know me as the hair guy. And,
hair guy.
And the best way I can describe it is that I wake up in the morning to get ready to look like I didn't get ready.
When did this start? This didn't start when you were younger, did it? I mean, did this start recently, or when did you do all this?
Not too recent. That's a great question. And I do have to credit my now wife. And at the time we were dating, and I don't know, maybe I can chalk this up as one of the big five takeaways for the guys that are listening to this episode. But my wife and I were dating in college, and she took a little bit longer to get ready than she told me that she was. And so I thought that I would throw her off and that I would kind of mess up my hair and make it all crazy. And so long story short, I finally met her down in the lobby. We were, again, in college at the time, and she saw the elevator doors opened, and then she would just like be dazzled by my hair. And so that just kind of became a thing. And I kept that going ever since.
Oh my gosh, that's great. Well, I've decided that you're the only one that can pull that off. If I did that, I would look like that I had a toupee that was just to the wrong side. So, so you're doing well.
I appreciate
Well,
that. Thank you.
I do want to. I know that you're not big on talking all about yourself, but I do want to talk about just quickly your personal life, because this flows over into Loveworks, and we see that by some of the things that you do. And one of those things are your different activities in exercise. Tell us a little bit about that. I really like to know more about that.
Definitely. Different activities and exercise. I was asked a question, it was a couple years ago. We were in San Diego, and this is kind of a get to know you icebreaker time. And someone asked me the question, and I haven't been asked this in a while. And they said, Michael, what do you like to do for fun? And you'd think that'd be a pretty easy question to answer. And I paused for a few seconds and I looked up at him and I said, for fun, I train for triathlon Ironmans. And he kind of looked at me like, that's your fun, but it has become my fun and my thing starting about 6 years ago. And I can honestly say that while I started training for triathlon 6 years ago, it was one of the first dreams I remember having as a kid. And I watched a father and son, is an amazing story, compete in the Kona Ironman Challenge. And I saw this documentary on ESPN Sports, and I remember an impression in my heart thinking to myself that one day I would love to cross the finish line of an Ironman. For your listeners that are still thinking about Tony Stark and the movie, we are talking about something different, but an Ironman is a combination of 3 different disciplines of swimming, biking, and running. And I do the full Ironman. And so our swim consists of a 2.4-mile swim, a 112-mile bike ride, and then a full marathon, 26.2 miles, and you have 17 hours to finish. And so I just finished my 5th full Ironman in Port Elizabeth,
Holy moly,
Africa, back in April, and I'm training for my 6th in Cozumel, Mexico. So we're excited about that, and that's going to be a family trip together.
I'm sitting here shaking my head. If only my hobby was training for intense physical activity, I would probably be a lot different person. That's awesome.
Michael. What is your thought when you're doing that? I mean, when you've already swam. I don't know the order, but you've swam. You're running. I mean, what is your thought? Are you thinking, why did I do this? Or are you thinking, this is exactly what I signed up to do and I'm loving it?
I wish it was pretty, but it's not. And I think I have thought in every one of the 5 races at some point, and in a few races multiple times, like, why am I doing this? And it's actually going to be one of the high 5 takeaways that we're going to talk about in just a little bit. But yeah, I definitely have those thoughts. But I believe that completing these races, I don't compete in these races. I'm completing. I'm doing my best to finish it. But I believe that it's carried over into every area of my life. And I was really honest. I look back at just growing up in high school and even in college, and I remember that I was the guy. And I don't know if your listener can relate or if you guys can relate, but I was the guy that had a lot of great ideas. And a few of those I would even take steps forward with and set into motion. But I unfortunately quit a good number of things that I look back on that I regret that I had quit those things. And so in each of those moments during a race that I've thought about, like, why am I doing this? It'd just be so much easier to stop and to grab a cold drink and a shower and eat a pizza or a hamburger and go home. I thought about those moments when I was growing up, and I had stopped doing something. I've quit something, prematurely. And then I thought back to, why we made this family commitment. And, I've got my family that's waiting for me at the finish line, that's counting on me. I have even the students support, back here, in Norman that are counting on me. And so those are the things that really drive me forward to eventually almost crawl across that finish line.
Wow. I honestly can't even imagine. I mean, that's amazing. Well, listeners, we want y'all to know we've heard your comments, we've taken them into practice, and we are going to start jumping into our 5 key takeaways earlier into the podcasts. That way we can spend the majority of our time on these things that you really want to hear that provide you value. So in true high five fashion, Michael, let's go ahead and start with your 5 key takeaways, and we'll elaborate on those a little bit more.
Wonderful. Can we do air high fives with you and your listeners?
Air
Absolutely.
high five right now.
There we go.
What y'all?
We love doing air high fives here at Loveworks. Let's jump in.
Tell us your first takeaway of the 5.
Yeah, and I think I could say about each of these that they're my favorite. But this one,
of course,
really impacted me in a huge way. And the first takeaway is finding a need and filling it. And I think it was Aristotle who even said that, where your talent and the needs of the world cross, that there lies your vacation. And I spent a lot of time, even back like in early college and, being inundated with lots of questions of like, what are you going to do, with your life? And sometimes I think we can make it more complicated than it even needs to be. And personally speaking, I'll never forget that I was presented with an opportunity to go out into the community to volunteer at an apartment complex area. So it's kind of a lower socioeconomic area. And I'll never forget riding a school bus over to this apartment complex, and we had some food on the bus that we were going to hand out. And I was even kind of thinking myself, like, should I even be doing this? Like, why am I waking up even, early? Is this even going to make a difference or an impact? And as the bus was pulling into this area, I'll never forget just all of these kids, young boys and girls that were running from their homes and apartments out to the bus with big smiles on their face. And I was just completely surprised by that. And then it was just a little soccer ball that I used to play soccer with these kids and for a couple of hours. And I was 23 at the time. And I'll never forget that night going to bed. And just before I fell asleep, I felt this, I had this thought of like, for the first time, I feel like my life, this day had meaning and had purpose behind it. And so I just made a commitment that, I'm going to live my life and lead my life where I'm going to find needs, and I'm going to do my best to fill them. And so looking at Loveworks, we did that 7.5 years ago. And I mentioned this earlier, but we saw a need, an unmet need in our community that wasn't being filled. And it was to provide an opportunity to work with middle school age students. And so 7.5 years ago, we started the Loveworks Leadership organization, which began working with 27 students at that time. And now 7.5 years later, we worked with over 10,000 students across the state of Oklahoma.
That is unbelievable.
Another example of this is just 3 years ago. One of our favorite stories that we love to tell is about our Real Kitchen Salsa business that we helped a group of middle school students start at the age of 11 and 12. And while we started this entrepreneurial effort, we saw a need that wasn't being met in even our organization and in our community, but it was providing small business and entrepreneurship opportunities for, again, junior high students. And, we just had this thought, well, why wait until high school or taking, business classes in college, but why not create these opportunities now? And so it's another, great example of, us seeing a need and filling it. And now we're working on our 3rd startup small business at Loveworks. And the last need that I would say that we're filling is a need that we see even just to reach a younger age student. We thought 7.5 years ago that the work we were doing at Loveworks would be preventative, that we'd prevent students from, making, bad or negative choices, that would lead them, in a direction in their leadership journey. And we found that when we started working with 6th grade students, that it was more an intervention. And so we saw a need and we started a program now that's called Raising Little Leaders. And we have a vision starting this fall to begin working with pre-kindergarten students and eventually to create a leadership pipeline from pre-kindergarten all the way through 12th grade and a senior year in high school.
And my 5-year-old already loves it and enjoys going to those. What do they call them? What are the name? What is the name of the?
Yeah, so we call it
Raising Little Leaders.
We call it, yeah. So Raising Little Leaders is the program, and then Saturday Story Time. So
Story time. Yes. Yes. And what a crazy time that is.
Well, I was going to ask you additional questions on your first takeaway, but you already beat me to the punch and answered them all. So go ahead and tell us your second takeaway.
Definitely. This is another one of my favorite, and something that took some time to learn and really put into practice. And I know this sounds obvious, but the second takeaway is that, we really believe, and I believe, that people will most support what they have been given the opportunity to create themselves. And so really what we're talking about here is we're talking about giving those that we work with and that we lead a feeling of, I would say, meaning and significance, for them to know that their ideas, while they're not always necessarily great, but they are important. And that we need to believe in those, ideas and those thoughts that, either our students or, our coworkers have. And so we talk about this a lot. We want to be able to give as much of Loveworks as we can away, to our students. And it's been really interesting, the change that we've seen, over the last several years, with that mentality. You hear it in the business world, oftentimes that, CEOs or presidents will talk about their employees that have either an employee mindset or a mindset of ownership. And I really believe that when you give, again, your coworkers or the students opportunities to do things, not just to delegate the things that you don't want to do, but you actually empower them with important things of value. We've just seen our students come alive, over the last several years. And so that's just something that we, do our best to put into practice here as a team.
Well, I think there's something to be said for that. And it's a lot easier to say that than to do it, because I think our pride gets in the way when we're leading. Wouldn't you say that the reason why we don't give people the opportunity to create is because it just might put us under some pressure ourselves?
Oh, absolutely. No, definitely. And I think, to be honest, there are times where I like to be out in front. I like to do, the talking. And I even have that feeling that, the person to the left or the right of me, I know right now where they're at in their leadership journey is not going to be able to do it the exact same way that I would. But that's right. The only way, though, that they're going to be able to grow, and eventually be able to maximize and get that potential, activated, within them. But it's a tricky thing to do. It's kind of funny. I mentioned the Real Kitchen Salsa business, but I had this aha moment 2.5 years ago when we were at the farmer's market. In which we normally sell out of salsa. We start selling at 8 a.m. and we're normally sold out by 11:30. But I noticed that we sold the most salsa whenever I walked away from the table and our booth.
Yeah.
And gave our students, again, who are 12 years old, the opportunity to give their sales pitch, to, fumble around, with their words. But again, the Real Kitchen Salsa business is not about Michael. It's not about Loveworks, but it's about the stories, of our students and these young, entrepreneurs. And so now I'll find myself on a practical note, and I know this sounds obvious, but I'll find myself even in meetings. And so we have our team meetings on Friday mornings, or in a board meeting, that I'll find myself just intentionally standing up and walking out of the room so the conversation can continue. And even if there's important things that are being said, I'll just walk out of the room. And I don't do that every meeting, but those are just little tidbits and small things, that we can do, I believe, that can really help our team members, buy in even more, to the mission that we're trying to accomplish.
As much as we think that we're giving opportunity when we're in the room, sometimes we're stifling the opportunity. So it is better just to walk out sometimes.
Absolutely.
Your next takeaway, you said greatest need of the hour, SEL.
Yeah.
What is that?
So greatest need of the hour, and this is a big one, and I'm going to give if that's okay, just a little bit of background into this one. But SEL stands for social emotional learning. and it's part of our methodology here at Loveworks. And so just for a moment, if I could, I want to just paint a picture of this by taking a look at our generations and why this is going to be important for the CEO that is listening, for the manager that is listening to this episode, for moms and dads that are listening. But if you think back to the generations, at one time, the baby boomer generation was the largest generation of people who had ever lived, until not the Gen Xers that came along, but until the millennials. And so, in other words, there will be more boomers retiring from the workforce than there will be Gen Xers to replace them. So ready or not, the millennials are here. And soon after millennials, the generation that is following them, and that's the generation that Loveworks Leadership is currently working with, they have a few different names. One of them, commonly heard as Gen Z. Another is Homelanders. Well, they're right behind them. And what's interesting, though, is that research is telling us that both anxiety and depression in kids has been on the rise since 2012. And the reality is that this is crossing over into all demographics. And so we're not just talking like urban and rural, but we're talking suburban. And so some of these symptoms that could be seen, and what I'm talking about here would be a social withdrawal from either friends or family. These students, these employees, these workers that are feeling overwhelmed by normal expectations, sleeping far more than normal. And even in some extreme cases, we could be talking about self-harming, and we can be talking about eating disorders. And so what Loveworks has done is, and so this idea of SEL, social emotional learning, it's taking the K through 12 schools right now just by storm, and conversations, and how can we incorporate social emotional learning, into our practices of school, while at the same time still trying to keep up with standardized testing. And so at Loveworks, what we do is we use what we call a 3-prong approach in SEL. And so where we focus, I mentioned earlier, on the character development within our students, where we focus on competence, but then we also focus on the side of community engagement and community impact. And so here's what we're doing. We're focusing on a few things, on helping students to begin, maybe for the first time, to really start taking initiative on their own, and not just having mom or dad or a guardian, do life or do things for them. We're really working with students on time management to really focus on the things in life that really count. We're spending a lot of time really helping students to begin to understand, in priorities. We're helping students develop plans for personal growth, outside of the classroom or workplace. And then this one's a biggie, us helping students to identify their unique strengths and passions to really help them to develop a healthy self-image. And so that's just a practice that, that we're setting in motion, here, at Loveworks. That's part of our programming that we hope that's going to combat, some of the research that we're seeing.
Which that probably brings us into the next takeaway of rediscover your why. I would say that greatest need of the hour, if you can get that down, it probably will help you rediscover your why. Right?
No, absolutely. Rediscovering your why is huge. It was Viktor Frankl, who was a survivor, of the Holocaust, and he said that if you know your why in life, why you exist, that you can endure anyhow. And I'll just be honest with you. You asked me earlier just about the Ironman race. And when things, and I think your listener can relate to this, and maybe they haven't done a triathlon, but, life can be hard. It's not always hard. Life can be fun, but, the struggle is definitely real, and the storms and the challenge will come, and I've found myself, in a slow drift. But it's been this idea of going back to my why. And my personal why, has to do right now. And I think your why changes over the years. I mean, my why at the age of 41 is definitely different than what my why was at the age of 21. But my why today, has to do with legacy. And so when I start thinking about the choices that I make, every choice or how I'm spending my time, I'm thinking about the legacy and, how others' lives have been influenced by the life that I'm living. So my legacy right now, and I make choices and decisions. I think about my wife. I think about my kids. I think about Loveworks students. I think about my colleagues. I think about our partners in our community. So, I really believe that why, when we rediscover it, it's going to help me and our listeners to really find our way again, and still remember what it used to be like when we first started maybe our business, in the very beginning, and everything was so new and so exciting. And again, I think that why is just so key to keep us on track.
I think that is a very, very important point. And I'm sitting here looking at your fifth key takeaway, and it is actually one of my favorite pieces of scripture, and one of my favorite things that I've probably ever heard. Love never fails.
It's so true.
And I think, I'm just sitting here and I'm like, wow, how simple and how deep at the same time. Like, love never fails. And I know that you've already talked about love works and how that factored into the name. But I think that so often people can just in general, like I'm sitting here thinking, you get caught in traffic and you start talking to the person next to you like, hey man, what are you doing? Don't you know how to drive? And that's not obviously a very good, practice of love. And how often we get so caught up in ourselves just that we forget what it truly means to love each other in a day-to-day
Absolutely.
sense.
There's no question. I heard this our last takeaway here. I once heard how we put it into practice. I once heard a story once about a young boy. His name was John O'Leary, and he was burned over 97% of his body in a fire. And his childhood hero growing up was the voice of St. Louis Cardinals Major League Baseball. His name was Joe Buck. And so imagine this little 9-year-old boy is in a hospital and he's bandaged 100% of his body. So if he opened up his eyes, he can't see anything. And he's lying there, and the doctors have told him, and he's overheard, doctors tell his parents, that his chances of living, are very slim. And he hears the door open of his hospital room, and he thinks it's a doctor, and he thinks or it's a nurse. And then he starts hearing footsteps. And the next thing that he hears is this booming voice of his childhood hero, Joe Buck, saying, boy, you are going to live. And as soon as you get out of here, we are going to have John O'Leary Day at the ballpark. And John couldn't believe it. This is his childhood hero. But what I love about this story is that on the second day, Joe Buck returned and came back. And there was a third day, and there was a 1 month later, and a 3 month later. And that's what love is all about. I mean, love, it keeps going. It never gives up. It never fails. It keeps coming back. And I believe that it will be the force that will see this generation of student be given the hope that it needs to be the hope that this world so desperately has to have. And I love that. Yeah, love never fails.
Wow. Well, we are so thankful to have you on today. And, as the BriteBee team, we are grateful that you've allowed us to be a part of what you're doing and actually just have a very small piece in what you guys are accomplishing over there. So we're so thankful for that. I want to remind everyone to think about these takeaways. Again, find a need and fill it. People will most support what they have been given the opportunity to create. Greatest need of the hour, SEL is social, emotional learning. Rediscover your why, and love never fails. Guys, act upon this. Don't just listen to this, but act upon it, and it will truly change your life. Michael, thank you again for being on. I hope we didn't waste too much of your time.
It has been an absolute pleasure. I wish you could see how my hair looks, because it is really like rocking crazy today just for this podcast. But you are the best, and I so love the work that you're doing and the need that you are meeting in the insurance world, and it's incredible. So thank you both, and team.
Man, we're grateful. Well, we want to remind everyone to subscribe and to give us a review on this podcast. Man, please tell us what you thought of the conversation that we had today. And don't forget, if you are looking for insurance quotes that don't sting, try BriteBee out. Go to BriteBee.com, click Get a Quote, and you will find qualified agents of your choice under your control. Guys, have a wonderful day, and we will see you next time.